You are listening to Viewpoints from PlaceCloud. Cultural researchers tell stories of places from around the world. For the full multimedia experience and to support the creators you enjoy, visit placecloud.io.
If we turn off of the green onto Featherstone Road, then what we find is a real community hub here in Southall. What is today the Hindu temple, the Mandir, is where in 1962 the Indian Workers' Association opened their welfare centre, building on the work of the pioneering welfare service they'd been running for 5 years from Southall Community Centre. Now, when the first incarnation of the IWA was founded in the late 1930s, the very name, the Indian Workers' Association, marked them out as something different from either the Birmingham-based Indian Association, a network of middle-class students and doctors from India, or the India League, established in 1928, which brought together often middle-class Indians with British supporters of Indian independence, including Bertrand Russell and Michael Foot. The IWA was likewise strongly committed to the cause of independence, and they worked together with the India League on this. But they also had a far more working-class membership, made up largely of Punjabi factory workers, and a more acute class consciousness, drawing on various traditions of politics back in India. When Indian independence was won in 1947, this inevitably meant Indian associations in Britain lost a lot of their focus. For some, the focus drifted towards intercultural exchange and then later on anti-racist campaigning. Anti-racism was important to the new IWA, including the Southall branch founded in 1956, but so too was its work in the post-war period fighting for workers' rights. This was a time when the trade union movement tended to assume the workers it was fighting for were white men. The IWA developed something of a parallel operation that worked with the unions at times, called them out when they failed to stand up for black and brown workers, and provided support to those who were not receiving it from elsewhere. The IWA Southall in particular was strongly committed to winning these fights within the trade union movement. Local voices here were strong advocates of the idea that unions were essential to the fight against racism, at the same time as working closely with other organisations, like the Campaign Against Racial Discrimination. As well as activism, the history of the IWA has been one of practical support for the growing Asian community in different parts of Britain. Here in Southall, the number of Asians increased from the low hundreds in the early 1950s to around 1,000 in the late 50s, and 12% of the population by the mid-1960s. Something common to the IWA around the country was a kind of informal social work provided by those in the community who had plenty of experience of British bureaucracy. These might include travel agents, shopkeepers, or those organising Indian film festivals. But one group who were in particular need of advice and support were those arriving in the country. New arrivals rarely knew how to go about dealing with the problems of forged passports, finding jobs and somewhere to live. Within the IWA Southall branch, the positions of welfare officer and lady welfare officer were crucial for helping to address the everyday problems encountered with schools, taxes, immigration and bringing families to the UK, discrimination in housing and employment and more besides. With growing demand, a full-time staff at the new welfare centre from 1962 provided information, advice, and even adult education services. But this local story sits within a much wider history of the IWA, which is rich and complicated and rife with divisions. Some of these were local, with as many as 8 different groups campaigning for their candidates in some internal elections here in Southall. And others were influenced by Indian politics, with the connections of the IWA Southall branch to the Congress Party, India's dominant political party, notable in this respect. In others still, the divisions were very much about British politics, while the preference here in Southall was for being a critical friend of the Labour Party and trying to influence them in office. the rival leadership from the West Midlands saw both major political parties as being beyond the pale on matters of race. While they favoured adopting a militant stance, the IWA Southall was committed to bringing together all those in the community, emphasising commonality of experience. To quote Professor Verinder Kalra, "From its inception, the IWA in Southall aspired to promote mass community and worker participation. Unlike other IWA branches in Britain, IWA Southall emerged as an association in which individuals of differing political affiliations, persuasions and interests would become engaged and collectively work in the interests of all from the Indian subcontinent, including Pakistani workers, as well as immigrant communities from Africa and the Caribbean." In the summer of 1976, the murder of an 18-year-old Sikh engineering student, Gurdeep Singh Chagga, on the streets of Southall would prompt a radical shift in local anti-racism with the rise of the youth movement. But in those early decades of the post-war period, it was the IWA's workplace activism and initiatives like the Welfare Centre that ensured that helping with the everyday challenges, especially of new arrivals, was right at the heart of their work.